Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our communities. What do they do to get started, and what are they doing to stay there? And here we are, season 4. We're already in February, and I have an incredible guest today. I'm getting to talk to Lisa Keglovitz. Lisa is the Chief Human Resources Officer at ReaLManage. And Lisa, I've had you on my list to get you on the show for a long time, and here you are. I'm so glad to have you. How you doing?
I'm doing great. And thank you so much for the invitation and your patience, Bruce. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I always like to start the show out reflecting of when I came in, when my guests came into the path of my career. And for you, I think I might have known you before this, but I remember specifically meeting you at Michael's stores, and we were doing some roundtables for the company culture consortium. Yvonne Freeman had invited us to kind of be ambassador table guest. Do you remember that?
I do. And I really enjoyed working with Yvonne. I've worked with her at different events, spent time with her at different conferences. She's fantastic. But I do remember that event at Michael's.
Yeah. Yvonne had her on the show season 1. She's fantastic. Absolutely. And now I get to have you on, and you're with a new company, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about what you're doing with your company and all the things going on. So for those who don't know about ReaLManage, I would love for you to share just a brief highlight of who ReaLManage is and how do you serve your customers?
I would love to share that, Bruce. ReaLManage, we call ourselves the ReaLManage family of brands, and that includes Grand Manners and Sierra Connect. And we're currently one of the fastest growing association management companies in the country. Pretty proud of that. Currently ranking number 3 among the nation's HOA condo management companies. ReaLManage offers innovative management services to community associations of all types and sizes, including HOAs or homeowner associations. I know I have one. Condominium associations, co-ops, and large master plan communities. So in our Grand Manners division is the Distinguished Community Association Management Division of the ReaLManage family of brands. They provide dedicated staff, community association management services to luxury high-rises, lifestyle communities, and golf or country club communities. And then we also have Sierra Connect, which I'm also really proud of. It is our own proprietary cloud-based technology. That's what really differentiates us among our competitors. It's the most comprehensive SaaS and mobile app software provider in the community association industry. So it's just a little bit about ReaLManage.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And when I heard you talk about a growth oriented company, it gave me energy, because like Armstrong, we just acquired our 32nd company. And I was just telling somebody the other day about how good it feels to work for a company that is like in that growth mode. I mean, it's a lot of busy work, but it feels good, doesn't it?
It does. Absolutely, Bruce. We just closed 2 acquisitions last week, got to welcome 2 new companies into our company and our family of brands. So we're really excited about that as well.
How fun. I love it. We've known each other for a long time, but there's probably some things I don't know about the Lisa Keglovitz story. I would love for you to share your story. Like, where did you grow up, and how in the world did you get into leadership in HR?
So I grew up in Dallas, born and raised in Dallas, Texas. Actually went to school here, high school and college here. And what led me to HR was a very different and interesting turn. I went to college for accounting, so I majored in business and accounting, and I was working at Home Depot. I worked at Home Depot for almost 27 years, and thanks to 2 people at Home Depot, Jennifer Orman and Frank Rosie, they talked to me about getting into HR, and I asked them, why would I do that? Why would I get into human resources? That wasn't my plan. Accounting, I had just taken the CPA exam. That was my plan. And they said, you would be great at human resources. It's what you do. You hire, you teach, you train, you develop your employees, you have a high level of accountability for yourself and others. And we think you'd be great in human resources. And I said, okay, well, let's give it a shot. So I interviewed for an HR manager role, and it was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and got the job and moved my family to Albuquerque. And fascinating time at Home Depot. They were also in growth mode. And I started in a district that had 8 stores, and we grew to 40 stores. And it was just, like I said, a really exciting time.
Okay, I'm sitting there thinking, moving to Albuquerque, there had to be like a little bit of like, I don't know, maybe not anxiety, but like it's an adventure, like something new. What was that like?
So the one thing that I can say is I've lived in a lot of places. After high school, I moved to Monterey, California. So I've lived in Monterey, Tucson, Albuquerque, Tampa, Houston, San Angelo, Texas, and then Dallas many times. And the thing that I would say, each time I move to a new place, it's a new adventure. I get to meet new
Mm,
people. I get to
mm,
experience new things.
mm,
And I've enjoyed each place that I've lived in. Albuquerque for me was amazing. It was a great growth opportunity for me in terms of a career, but it also introduced me to so many great people in New Mexico and West Texas. And I love the food, I love the culture, I love the climate. And, I don't know if you're a snow person or outdoors person, but you have the slopes, you can go skiing, you've got outdoor activities. It's amazing. So I loved Albuquerque.
I love that. And you're talking relocation, you're talking my language here. And the thing about it is that I heard the former CEO of Spanx, Sarah Blakely, once said,
Mhm.
the more you experience, the more you can help others. And
That's
as
right.
you talk about that, even in your organizations, whenever people have to relocate, you can talk about those experiences. So I think that that's pretty cool. I would love for you to share, here you are, you're the CHRO. You didn't start there, but you probably had some people that have helped you along the way. I would love to hear, like, who were some of your mentors and what was it about them that made such a great mentor?
So I've got the pleasure of having many great mentors in my life. And I know that I didn't get to this role by myself. I had many
Mm,
people that helped get me here. And I've tried to thank each and every one of them along the way. Some of my great mentors in my career have been Frank Rosie, that I mentioned to you.
mhm,
He was my boss for over 7 years at Home Depot. And he was a great leader because he pushed all of us. He really
mm,
challenged us to do more than we thought we could do. He recognized a job well done, but he also wasn't afraid to tell you what you could do better.
mm.
And he did that frequently with all of us and said, here's what you could do better, here's what you have to do better. But then also thanked us publicly for jobs well done. So I really enjoyed working for him, learning from him. He passed away several years ago, and there were several of us on his HR team that were there at his
Mhm.
service. Telling his wife and daughter, what a wonderful leader he was, and how much he meant to all of us. So he was definitely one of the very impactful mentors that I've had along the way. Ashley Goldsmith at Home Depot was another great mentor. She's now the CHRO at Workday, and she was fantastic because I had just gotten into an HR director role, which was a very challenging role at the time. It was in Florida after we had had Hurricane Katrina and had several other hurricanes. And she was just a fantastic leader. And one of the things that she told me, when things were getting pretty tough, she said, Lisa, I've always got your back. And she always reminded me that she had my back and supported me when I had to make tough decisions. And so I would say she was definitely a great mentor as well. And then, I have a couple of others. At Home Depot, I also had a gentleman named Sean Gallagher. He was a store manager of mine. And he told me once, he said, Lisa, you have so much potential. And he goes, I don't think you even realize it. And so I just, I sat and talked to him. I said, what do you mean, by potential?
Mhm.
And he was one of those that really pushed me. He's the one that actually helped get me recognized for my ability to do something more than what I was doing. And that's when I had the opportunity to interview for the HR role. So I would say Sean Gallagher is definitely one of those great ones as well. And then I've got two others, and that's Mike Buskey and Paul Raines. And I met both of them at Home Depot and then had the opportunity to work with both of them again at GameStop.
Mm.
So Paul Raines was the CEO at GameStop. Mike was the SVP of HR at GameStop, and had a chance to come over and work with both of them again at GameStop. And, the thing that I realize about both of them is that they both are men of integrity.
Mm.
They have a strong moral compass. And, one of the things that I learned about from Paul is one of the most important things about being a leader. And he said, successful leaders have learned how to successfully manage their own anxiety.
Mm.
And I really thought about that because, when we were dealing with hurricanes at Home Depot or any other crisis, Paul was always the calm in the face of the storm. And, he taught all of us that as well. He said, we can all get in a room as leaders. We can yell, scream at each other, whatever we need to do. He said, when we go out, he goes, we're calm. He goes, we talk to our people, we help get them through this. And he goes, that's what we have to do as leaders. So he definitely taught me a lot about being a leader and what it meant to be a leader in times of crisis, and how you can successfully lead a team. He also taught us that you don't have to have 100% of the information to make a decision and to move forward. He said, if you wait until you have 100% of the information, you've waited too long and your competitor has already passed you. He said, so 80%, 85% of the information, make a decision, move quick. So he always taught us that, move fast, don't be afraid to fail, move fast. So, when I think about what all of them have had in common, I think I mentioned to you, they all have a strong moral compass. They live their values, not only their internal values, but the values of the organization. And, they always stayed true to their own values. And so I admire each one of them. And, still friends with Mike Buskey, one of my mentors. He definitely helped me get here.
I got to tell you, there's a lot here. Now, if you're listening right now, you need to take out your pen and your journal. You need to make sure you're taking notes. There is so much here. First of all, as you talk about Frank Rosie, man, so like, what a gift for him to share with you. And it's really hard to like balance that, pushing someone, but yet recognize them. Hey, you're doing a great job, but hey, you got more in you. And just to be surrounded by that. And I'm so sorry to hear about him passing, but all of these great mentors, Ashley and Sean. And I love that. Mike and Paul, just like being surrounded. And so now as I watch you in your leadership now, like I get it, like she's been surrounded by such incredible people that have given you great advice. I do want to talk about something though, that you just said. You talked about what they all have in common. And that is they have the strong moral compass. They're values driven. And you actually posted something on LinkedIn today. And I was reading about that and I was thinking to myself, someone has instilled this in Lisa. And you talked about it's Martin Luther King Day. We're actually recording this. We're going to play this in February. But you talked about how important it was to work for a company that had a strong value-based company. I would love for you to kind of expand on that. Number one, how good does that feel? And number two, how do you continue to communicate that out to your team members?
So that's a great question. And that's one of the reasons I went to work at ReaLManage. I talked to the CEO, Chris O'Neill, and talked to American Securities, which is the private equity firm behind us. And, when I talked to Chris, it was very clear that this was a man that, says and does exactly what he says he will do. He's definitely one of those individuals with a strong moral compass as well. And when I've heard him talk at holiday parties or to our employees about anything, he often brings up the values of the company. And his acronym for the values is PARIS. So trying to make it very simple, PARIS. And, so it's personal relationships, it's authenticity, it's respect, it's integrity. And his favorite one is selflessness. And so when I wrote, this article about celebrating Martin Luther King Day, to me, it's so important to talk about the values that we have as an organization, the values that Martin Luther King Jr. personified in all of his actions. So it was definitely very important to me to come to work for a strong values-based organization. And I talk about those values as well when I'm talking to our employees, when I'm talking to new companies that we bring on board. And then what we did when we launched our performance reviews this year, it's the very first time we're launching performance reviews at ReaLManage, and I incorporated those values into the review form. So it's half results, which are the financial results and metrics that we have to achieve, and the other half is values. So how well do our employees personify those values? How well do they live those values? So it's definitely a piece of what we do, how we do things, how we operate.
I love that. I love everything about that. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I know there's people listening right now that are trying to figure out, how can I get, like, we have these values in our organization, they're hung up on the wall, but we don't quite communicate those. How do we get those out? Now, it reminds me of the time when you said that. It reminds me of the time I heard Michael Phelps talking at SHRM National, and he was talking about another subject, but he said, the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. And it's like, you just got to keep talking about it and identifying that. Hey, I do want to ask, I like to ask all my questions, one question around purpose. And you have, like, had an incredible career, right? And like I mentioned before, you're the CHRO right now. You thought you were going to start out in accounting. You made all these different relocations. Was there a moment when you found your lane? I always like to talk about finding your lane, found your, like, that purpose. Like, was there a moment, or were there moments along the way that said, you know what, I love what I do, and this is what I plan on doing for my career?
Absolutely. So for me, I think there were really two things that really stood out in terms of, finding my lane. One was helping others grow and develop. That's always been important to me. I wanted to identify people that had potential that may or may not have realized they had it. And to me, that's the most exciting part of being a leader, is finding that potential in people, helping them grow, helping them develop, and getting them to the next level. I had the chance to do that at Home Depot, had the chance to do that at GameStop. And for me, that was really exciting. The other thing that I'm really passionate about is diversity and inclusion. And when I was at Home Depot, we had the opportunity to really talk about diversity and inclusion. We launched, several diversity and inclusion efforts to improve what the face of Home Depot looked like. And one of the things that I did as a leader at Home Depot is I challenged my leaders to think differently, but I often placed females in roles that were traditionally held by men, but I also placed men in roles that were traditionally held by women. And, I got a lot of pushback for that. But for me, that was some of the most exciting work that I had a chance to do, because I wanted to break those barriers. I didn't want people to think that only men could do certain jobs at Home Depot and that only women could do certain jobs at Home Depot. I wanted to open that up to anybody who's qualified can do this job. And so I challenged a lot of leaders to think differently. I still do the same thing. Because I want everyone to know that anybody can do whatever job they want to do, that they're experienced to do, that they're passionate about. So I think those two things are really what I place all my efforts into, and it's my passion. And like you said, it's definitely my lane and where I found my purpose.
Well, and it takes me back. The first thing you said about helping others grow, it takes me back to one of your mentors, Sean, talked about, hey, I see more in you. Like, I see that potential, and it's probably got to, like, it like builds something inside you, wanting to say that to others. I see more in you, and I want to help you get there. I do want to talk about something, though, real quick, that you just mentioned. And I wrote these two words down: think differently. I love that. But you used another word there, and you talked about pushback. There's going to be times when we think differently, we might get a little bit of pushback. What's your perspective around that for those that listening to the podcast right now and said, you know what, I try to do that and I get pushback. What's maybe something you might share that might help them with that?
So I can think of two specific times in my career where I've gotten pushback and I just continued to move forward and help get that leader to, or a group of leaders to my side of thinking. And so, the first time was when I worked at Home Depot, and I was challenging a leader about why he had moved this female into the paint department. And he said, well, people in the paint department have to lift really heavy cans of paint. Those 5-gallon cans of paint are really heavy, and I don't know if she can do that. And I said, well, it's really interesting that you say that, because I said, do you know what department I worked in? And he looked at me, he goes, no. And I said, paint. And I said, I think I'm the same size as that female that you're saying can't do that. And I said, and she's got a lot more, a lot more equipment now to move things than we had when I was in the paint department. I said, so maybe you should ask her if she can do that. Show her what the job description is. Tell her what it is, and then ask her if she's interested in doing it. And if she is, put her in the department. Let her try it. Let her experience it. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And then he said, okay, you know what? You're right. I will talk to her. she ended up working in the paint department, and she was thrilled that she got the opportunity. And so it was things like that that made little chinks in the way that they were thinking about, looking at people differently. And so that made me really happy to help her get into a department she really wanted to get into, and not be told no just because she was a female. And then the second time, the big aha moment, when I was at GameStop, I started asking the question from all of our marketing leaders. I said, how many females are gamers? So if we looked at the gaming population, what percentage are females?
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, well, it's great. We've done a lot of this work. We do have those demographics. 44% of gamers are females. And I said, huh, okay. I said, so let's look at all of our numbers. Do we have 44% of our stores? Are they females or males? 44% of our field leadership team, is that male or female? If we look at the corporate office, what does that look like? And so we put together our diversity and inclusion strategy many years ago. And when I talked on stage to all of our store leaders at our big store manager conference that we had every year, I talked to them about 44% of gamers are females. And I said, so what does your population in your store look like? And so what I challenged each one of them to do, same thing that I mentioned earlier, is to think differently. So when you're thinking about staffing your store, look at the community that you serve. Is it predominantly Hispanic? Is it predominantly Asian, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean? Is it, Black? Is it older? Is it younger? What's your population? What is your demographic? And when they started looking at their communities and started staffing differently, I actually had one store manager in Colorado who came up to me and said, Lisa, I've staffed my store. And he told me about the people that he had hired. He goes, I hired 3 Spanish-speaking associates. I hired 2 Black associates. I hired 3 females, and I hired 1 Vietnamese and 1 white guy. And I said, okay, why are you telling me this? Are you telling me this because I'm in human resources? And he goes, no, because I did what you told me to do. He goes, I looked at my community. He goes, I went over to Target that was close to my store. And he goes, and they have all these Vietnamese customers in there. He goes, I don't have any come to my store. And he saw that there were Vietnamese employees at Target. And then once he staffed the store with Spanish-speaking employees, he said, now I have families coming in at night that speak Spanish. And he goes, and I saw this jamboree next to my store, and moms and their little kids would come out. He goes, but they would never come into my store. They would only go to Target. And once I hired these females to work in the afternoon, all of a sudden moms were coming into my store in the afternoon. He said, I increased my sales by 10% by just making those changes and staff to my community that I serve. And I thought, now this is what we need to do in all of our stores across the US. If we could just do this, not only would our customers feel better about shopping in our stores, but we'd also see that increase in sales volume, because people want to shop where they feel comfortable, where people look like they look, talk like they talk. And so anyway, that's what we talked about. And it was just really challenging the way people think, and just challenging them to think differently about diversity and inclusion.
I love that. I love that story. And how, and the story you share is like how someone took you up on that advice and said, hey, you know what, I'm willing to do this. And now all of a sudden, great things are happening. Sometimes it just, I remember Mel Robbins once said a conversation can change your life. And just that conversation about that. And like we talked about before, the more you talk about things, the easier it gets. My network is just a very diverse network, and I believe in everything you're talking about. So, and I guarantee you there's people listening right now going, oh my gosh, that is fantastic. So thank you for sharing that. Hey, let's talk leadership here. I mean, here we are, 2023. You're in this new role. I would love for you to, first of all, I do like to ask my guests, if someone were to say, hey, Lisa, what's leadership? How would you respond to that?
To me, leadership it's about responsibility. It's responsibility for your employees. It's responsibility to not only take care of them and provide them opportunities, but it's to help them grow, help them become an even better version of themselves. And for me, it's always been about that ownership, that accountability. And that's the way I look at it now. We actually add in a leadership line on our performance reviews, and it's all about, does this person live the values? Do they, personify the values? What about driving results? Are they driving results? We're all ultimately responsible for the results of our organization, but it's also that responsibility for our people.
I love how you added that to the review to say, hey, this is more than numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a much bigger picture
Yes.
to help us get to where we're going to go. And I love how you talked about helping people get to where they want to go at the end of the day. Well, like I said, you're in this new role. I'm always curious. Someone that's in a new role, whether they're experienced or not as experienced, I always like to ask them, like, what's that been like? And more importantly, how does someone develop influence in a new role? Here you are, you're the CHRO, but you still have to build, develop and influence and get people to buy into what you're doing. How do you do that as someone new in the company?
Well, I think there are several ways that people can do that. And I found this in, each one of the companies that I've been in, and that is, it's so important to build relationships. It's hard to be respected as a leader if people don't know who you are, what you stand for, what you'll do. And what I found is, building relationships is one of the key ingredients there. Understanding the business, whatever business you're in, you have to know the business. And it's not good enough for me to come in and say, I know human resources. I need to understand the business. I need to learn more about the business. What makes us successful? How do we operate? What can we do better in terms of operation? And so for me, human resources has always been about being a strong business partner, which is understanding how our actions every day in human resources impact the bottom line. And so for me, it's being closely connected to the CFO, making sure I'm understanding how all of our decisions impact the bottom line. He works with me really closely too, to make sure that, everything we're doing is right for the people and right for the business. And so it's a strong partnership with the CFO, with the CEO, and with all of my peers. But it's really important, I think, for any HR leader to truly understand the business and make sure they understand the business first before they start talking about human resources.
I love that. I wrote down right for the people and right for the business. That is fantastic. As you shared that, it just, my mind immediately went back to when I took the HR certification. I was at the Dallas HR class, and Barbara Hoover said the most important thing you need to know is know the business. And I was
right.
like, you are right on. This is about business leaders. This isn't about HR. It's about leading business. And so I love how you shared that. I want to expand just real quick. So building relationships, though, that's sometimes that takes a long time. It's hard. I talk about in my latest book about developing influence. I talk about the first thing you got to do is got to build trust. But a lot of people want to skip to that next step. They want to go find a problem or build a business case when they haven't built the relationships. And how do you I don't know, maybe a couple of small little points about how someone listening they're trying to develop a relationship, maybe they're let's say that they're an entry or mid-level person, and they want to build a relationship with someone maybe at a higher level. Any tips you might give them to where they might try to start building that relationship?
Absolutely. And so for me, one of the most important things is taking the time to make those face-to-face connections. And I used to challenge my group. So at GameStop, we had a Women's Leadership Council cohort. So there were 8 of us, female leaders, that had a group of 8 that we got to work with over the course of a year. It was a fantastic program. And one of the things that we did, we talked about that. We talked about building relationships. And this was pre-COVID, when you had a lot more face-to-face interaction. Right. But I challenged each one of them to think about the times that they ran into the CEO in the parking lot, or in the elevator, or walking up the stairs, or in the cafeteria, in the hallway, wherever they happen to be ready to talk to that next level leader or the top leader. I said, because when you run into and I filled in the blanks with all of the names. When you run into them, what do you talk about? What do you say? And it goes back to that elevator speech. Do you have 15 seconds or 30 seconds of material ready to go when you run into that person that you really want to connect with? And if you don't, I'd prepare that now and make sure you can talk to them about what you're working on or what you're most excited about, so that you can talk to them and connect with them. Because a lot of times that's all you have, that 15 seconds, 30 seconds, passing in the hallway, walking up the stairs, whatever it is. And so challenged each one of them to do that. And they were really excited when they came back to me and said, I ran into, the CEO or CFO, and we walked up the stairs and I talked to them about this project. It was amazing. And, so it's things like that. It's spending a few minutes or seconds in some cases, connecting with people, leaving them with an impact so that the next time they talk about, Kelly or Sue or Bob, they go, oh yeah, I ran into that person and they told me about this great project they were working on. And then I can reinforce, what that person does for us, what they can do for us, their capabilities. So it's working both angles of that. It's helping that person build that relationship, but also pushing them to take that first step.
So I wrote down the word intentional. And
Yes.
as you're talking about that, I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, that's like what we should all be doing is we should like take some time to say, write down that elevator speech, right? If I was going to be going to my office and I ran into Lisa and I had like 15 seconds with her, what would I say? Oh my gosh, this is so good. This is fantastic. I appreciate that because I know, and I do know that people that are listening right now, they're taking notes or thinking, you know what, I need to try this because I think what you said, you talked about building a relationship, understanding the business, but I think that building relationship piece is that one piece that can really move the needle for, it doesn't matter what role you have in the company. You can become more if you can build more relationships. Hey, I do want to ask you because I have this question. I'll see it often, and people talk about how has HR changed, and you've been doing this for a long time. I'm just curious from your perspective, how has HR changed? Over the last, I don't know, let's say 10 or 15 years that you've seen.
Well, I've been in HR longer than 20 years. So I will say that it's changed a lot over those 20 years.
Yeah.
When I first got into HR, it really was about the rules, the laws, compliance. And I won't say it was all checklists, but we were really focused on, very specific things. And as we've evolved over the decades, it's become more of a focus on being a business partner. While yes, we have to be in compliance with laws and rules and processes, absolutely. It's more evolved in terms of a leadership role. And so when I think about HR now, it's about, as I mentioned, understanding the business, understanding the complete business, how all the functions work together to make the business successful. And we as HR leaders have to think about that in terms of what do we need to be successful? How can we help the business? And I always challenge everyone on my team, how do we add value to the organization? So always thinking about HR in terms of adding value to the organization. And so for me, it's not about a checklist. It's not about compliance. While yes, we have to be in compliance, it's about understanding business first, the people first. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right teams? Are we helping fuel the business for growth by making sure we have the right talent on the team and the right talent in the right seats, on the team? So for me, that's, one of the ways that I've seen HR evolve over the years.
And I think a lot of that goes back to what you're talking about when you talk about becoming a better business partner and adding value to the organization. It goes back to that building relationships. I got to build those relationships to understand what their needs are, how they see it from their angles and things like that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. Hey, let me ask you this. I mean, you're a pretty driven leader. I mean, I know you work a lot. What drives you every day?
What drives me every day? I'd say it's two things. One is to help others. When I go to work, I'm looking at how I can help others in the business, how I can help others in the community. It's about helping others. That's what excites me every day. And then, the other thing that, really pushes me forward is my family. I do what I do to make my kids proud, to to do things to make our lives better. That's really what motivates me.
I love that. I know there's some people listening that they're trying to continue to like grow their career. And I would I'd like to ask one last question before we kind of shift here. And that's around development. And one of the things I notice is it doesn't matter what level you are. Great leaders are continuous learners. They're just continuing to develop themselves. Any tips you might share for someone that's listening that is looking to just continue to grow, maybe into whether it's into a director role or a VP role or a CHRO? Any things that you did that you might share that might help them along the way?
Absolutely. So there's so many ways to, to learn and develop. And to your point, I know that my CEO and everyone on my team knows this. You have to keep learning. You have to keep growing. Because as the business grows, there are things that we need to learn to be able to continue to move forward. So for each leader that's out there that wants to grow and continue to move up in the organization or in other organizations, keep reading. I'm an avid reader. Keep reading, learn other things. Whether it's business books, leadership books, continue to learn and grow that way. But it's also HR specific, so for HR leaders, I've got my SPHR certification, my SHRM certification, but it's how do we continue to grow as leaders? So whether it's, something like the Southwest HR Conference or, other HR conferences where they can learn from other leaders, I think those are so important and so critical to be able to, continue to enhance their knowledge base, to make them more confident as leaders. I think that's so important. Yeah. And even for my payroll team, continuing to help them push forward to get different certifications, payroll certifications, to make sure that they're confident in the decisions that they make every day.
I love that. I think about how leaders don't develop in a day; they develop daily, right? It's putting those habits in place and just kind of chipping away. I always talk about the importance of laying a brick every day. Just keep laying bricks. And one day you'll look back and you'll say, man, how did that house get there? It's fantastic. This has been so much fun. I love that. I do have one more question before we go to It's Time to Accelerate. And it's a question I like to ask my guests around advice. Now, I want to ask you, Lisa, have you ever been given any advice? And you've given some incredible advice today. But anytime anyone give you some advice that it was just so good, and maybe it was one of what you shared from your mentors, but it was so good, you just find yourself sharing that with others often.
Absolutely. So, I've had a chance to work with a lot of great people, over the years, but one of the individuals that I worked with at GameStop, her mantra was assume positive intent. So when someone is talking to you, always assume they have positive intent, because so often people get upset, at what someone says to them or how they act or how they respond towards them. And her mantra was always assume positive intent. And so, that's probably number one on my list. And I tell people that all the time, because they get upset because of an email they received or somebody's actions on their team. And I always tell them, start with assume positive intent. And so that helps. And that helps them take a step back, think about what just happened, think about it objectively. And did they really mean something negative? And most of the time they didn't. So it's, starting there. So assume positive intent. And then, the second piece I shared earlier, which is you have to learn to manage your own anxiety. And this was something that I asked of Paul Raines. I said, how do you do that? I've seen you on TV. I've seen you in interviews where they're bombarding you with questions and you're always calm, cool, collected with a smile on your face. And he said, well, once again, you have to learn how to manage your own anxiety. He goes, but you have to be prepared. He said, so before I go into any one of those interviews, I've already tried to think of every question they could possibly throw at me. So I am, ready. I'm ready to answer their questions. And he goes, and then when you see me smile and take a moment, it's because I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next. And so it was that. It was just so important to hear that from him. And I know I mentioned one of my mentors passed away, which was Frank Rosie. Paul Raines also passed away in 2018. But there are so many of us that still talk about Paul and his leadership to this day. Great leader. So definitely learned that from him. And one of the other individuals that I worked with at GameStop, she said, sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And I said, okay, because I'm a person of action. I'm always moving, always going. And she said, sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And I took a second. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, sometimes you have to take a step back. You have to assess the situation. You might need to learn a few things before you move forward, and then you can move quicker. And it always frustrated me to slow down, but that was a little bit of advice that I got from her, and that's definitely helped along the way. And then, take risks, move fast. That's one of the things that I shared from Paul. You don't have to have 100% of the information to make a decision and move forward. Don't wait too long, because your competitor will get ahead of you. And then, the last piece goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is personal accountability. And that is always apologize if you've made a mistake. When it comes to whether it's you making the mistake or somebody on your team, I've always shared this with my leaders. As a leader, you have the ultimate responsibility for your team. So I take ownership for anything that happens on my team. I make sure that everyone knows that a mistake was made. This is what happened. This is how we're going to correct it. And this is how we make sure it never happens again. But we always, take ownership, apologize, and make sure that people know that we're truly sorry, and make sure that we know that it's never going to happen again.
I love all of that. Thank you so much. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Assume positive intent.
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
Yes.
I think there's going to be some people that are use that. I thought about when you talked about being prepared. That's one of the things that people ask me a lot of times. They're like, "Hey, you do a lot of speaking. Do you ever get nervous?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I have a little bit, but I'm prepared.
Yes.
I'm very prepared for that, and it helps you. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it does. It helps me manage my anxiety. It helps me calm, bring the calm. So this is so good, Lisa. I'm so grateful for you coming on.
Thanks,
Hey,
Bruce.
we're going to shift off over to It's Time to Accelerate for the last few minutes of the show. Kind of fun. I know you read earlier, you mentioned something about reading. Would you rather read a book or listen to a podcast? And do you have any favorites?
Yes. So book for me. I love books. I love the actual physical copy of a book. And I've got one of my favorites by Marshall Goldsmith, which is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I think it's so important. And I've shared this book many times with leaders on my team, that just because you're good at the job you're doing now, it doesn't make you good at the next level job. And you've got to lead differently. You've got to think differently. And, I shared some of those fatal flaws out of that book, with many people, because I said, you've got to continually get better and develop as a leader. You can't just have a one size fits all leadership style that will suit you for every role. It doesn't work that way. So that's definitely one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, fun. That's fantastic. I'll put that in the show notes if somebody wants to check that out.
Okay.
How about outside of work? I mean, again, I know you work a lot, but you do some things outside of work. What energizes you?
So anything outdoors. I'm a pretty adventurous person. We just went snowmobiling up in Big Sky, Montana. So I'm all about being outside, doing fun stuff with the family. And then my grandson, John David, he turned 6 in a week. So he definitely energizes me. In fact, I'll be at his birthday party this weekend at a trampoline park. So I'll be that grandma out there on the trampoline with him. So yeah, anything outside. And then my husband and I just took a flying trapeze class at the Dallas Circus Center. And I've got to say, that was pretty fascinating. It's scary if you have a fear of heights, but definitely love doing stuff like that. Just getting outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I have a grandson that's going to be 6 this year as well. So I didn't realize we had that in common. Yeah, Crosby. Nice. Oh my God. And by the way, Big Sky, Montana, I was scheduled to speak there in 2020. And the lady I was working with, she said, I have a condo in Big Sky. And we were all looking forward to going there. And then of course we didn't get to go, but I'm looking forward to hitting that. Hey, what are you grateful for?
So I have to say, my husband, I mean, he's my biggest supporter. He's my sounding board when I get frustrated. Yeah. And he's always willing to go on another crazy adventure with me. So when I say, let's go do a flying trapeze class, he's like, okay, let's do it.
I'm just sitting here envisioning you swinging on this trapeze. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine.
It's
What
fun.
was-
You should go check it out. You should go do it.
Oh my gosh, I'm like you. I fear heights, but you're right. When we get out of our comfort zone, when we
Mhm.
experience more, we can
Yes.
offer more. I love it.
That's
Hey, I
right.
have my last question I have for you, and this is probably my favorite question, Lisa. Lisa,
Mhm.
10 years older, she's around the corner knocking at your front door, and you're going to go answer that door.
Mhm.
What's she going to tell you?
So for me, it's pretty easy. Don't stress so much and don't be so self-critical. There are plenty of other people out there that
Mm,
will criticize you all day and all night. You don't have to do it too.
that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's
It
hard. I
is.
mean, I find myself going, "Oh my gosh, I missed that," or "I should have said that," and but nobody else saw it. We're
Right.
just always, looking
No,
at that, right?
always, always.
Oh my goodness, this has been so great. Well, listen, you are definitely driving in the leadership lane. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. I so appreciate you coming on the show. Hey, if somebody heard something today, I mean,
Mhm.
you gave so many great nuggets, but they want to follow you. They want to learn more. How could they connect with you? What's the best way?
They can connect easily with me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with anybody out there. I'm connected to several people in the HR community and in the business community. Feel free to reach out to me that way. They can reach out to me via email, just lisa.keglovitz@realmanage.com. They can reach out to me anytime.
And I'll put that in the show notes. And I
Perfect.
always like to say, if you're going to reach out to Lisa on LinkedIn, just put a note in there. You heard her on Life and Leadership Lane podcast. It just
Right.
makes that connection easier. Like, hey, how do I know them? Oh, they heard me on the podcast. And so definitely do that. I'm so grateful for you coming on the show, sharing your wisdom, your perspective. You are amazing. And I appreciate you so much. And I appreciate your friendship. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I can't wait to share. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.